Queen Elizabeth II. Dieser McDonald's gehört der Monarchin. Untertitel: Ob sich Queen Elizabeth II. Auch ab und zu Fastfood gönnt.
Die ist bestimmt nur Fast Food.
Ja, so schaut die auch aus. Das ist ihr Geheimnis nämlich. Wir alle fragen uns, wie kann die so alt sein? Und ihr Mann, Philipp, 99 Jahre alt.
Hat eine Herz-OP.
Ja, leider im Krankenhaus gerade.
Das ist richtig.
Ich glaube an ihn, dass er das überlebt.
Ja.
Ja, der wird noch 100 werden. Wann hat er Geburtstag? Wann wird er 100?
Weiß nicht.
Das wäre wirklich traurig, wenn das ist. Ich meine 99. Wenn man 99 wird, wird man auch direkt 100 eigentlich.
Hm.
Ja, das ist. Der hat Geburtstag am 10. Juni. Na bitte, hallo. Das ist. Der geht den Weg. Der geht den Weg.
Natürlich.
Ja, heute tatsächlich haben wir einen ganz besonderen Gast, Menning.
Das
Und
ist
das war
richtig.
wirklich, also ich muss ganz ehrlich sagen, für mich war das ein Erlebnis, was ich niemals vergessen werde. Bill Clinton, 20 Minuten Zeit hat er uns gegeben für dieses Interview. Habe ich allein geführt, weil wir keine Zeit verschwenden wollen mit so einem tollen Gast. Haben wir voraufgenommen, vorigen Sonntag, und wird jetzt hier im Anschluss eingespielt bei euch. Dass ihr das hören könnt, Chat. Ihr habt alle gedacht, wir verarschen euch, aber nein. Es ist wirklich soweit. Ich kann es nicht in Worte fassen.
Würden wir
Kannst du das
jemals
in Worte fassen?
die Zuhörer verarschen? Natürlich nicht.
Nee, machen wir nicht.
Wir machen
Ja.
sowas nicht.
Deshalb ist hier im Anschluss für euch der Beweis. Eigentlich müssen wir auch gar nicht lang umherreden, oder?
Nö.
Eigentlich
Müssen wir
können wir
nicht,
das
ne,
direkt
ja.
einspielen. Das können wir auch nicht. Ich meine, wir haben die Schlagzeile, gibt es sonst irgendwas Interessantes?
RP ist dead.
Das ist richtig.
Aber
Lost, wer das in 2021 noch spielt.
ja, ekelhaft. Ich guck grad.
Ja.
Für alle Football-Fans, Cam Newton wurde resigned bei den New England Patriots.
Das ist doch toll. Die New England Patriots, für alle NFL-Nicht-Profis, ich als Profi kann das ja jetzt sagen, sind ein Top-Team aus der NFL, wirklich top, immer die letzten Saisons gut, begeistert die Fans und immer vorne mit dabei. Glaube ich, kann man so sagen. Es gibt andere News.
Ach ja?
Es gibt die neue Red Bull Summer Edition. Ist geleakt.
Und die ist?
Drachenfrucht.
Hm.
Drachenfrucht in der grünen Dose Red Bull Summer Edition.
Aber
Bereits
Drachen,
jetzt teilweise zu erhalten.
also,
Ja, bitte.
ja, okay.
Na was denn? Was ist dein
Ja, nicht
Bedenken?
meins.
Na bitte, bitte sprich, Bursche.
Ja,
Was
ist nicht
dein
unbedingt
Bedenken?
meins.
Nicht deins?
Nee.
Drachenfrucht. Na, du musst es erstmal probieren, bevor du sagen kannst, es schmeckt dir nicht. Das ist das, was dir jeder sagen wird, Menning.
Ja, das ist richtig.
Ja, ich werde es für dich probieren, okay?
Ja, toll, das hilft mir. Das hilft
Natürlich.
mir weiter.
Ja, wir haben ja, wie alle wissen, den haargenau selben Geschmack.
Natürlich.
Stichwort Marci. Stichwort, sag ich dann nur. Marci. Das ist, glaube ich, der größte Beweis dafür.
Ja, das ist richtig.
Der wird sich freuen, wenn er das hört. Wenn er den Podcast überhaupt anhört,
Marci,
dieses Arschloch.
Entschuldigung. Also bitte.
Nee, muss ich leider sagen. Und wenn er ihn nicht anhört, dann hört er das ja sowieso nicht. Und wenn er es hört, muss er dieses Arschloch nicht ernst nehmen, weil dann war es ja gar nicht gegen ihn gerichtet, weil er es ja hört. Verstehst du?
Ja, ich verstehe.
Das ist eigentlich ein Five-Head-Move gewesen. Also, Grüße Marci. Ja, das war's. Schicken wir die Zuhörer weiter. Auf dieses Interview, auf welches die so lang gewartet haben.
Ja.
Mit Recht.
Natürlich.
Ja, danke fürs Zuhören, nicht wahr? Von unserer Seite. Mönning, du darfst natürlich wieder die letzten Worte an die Dinge
Natürlich.
richten.
Ich sage
ja.
Ciao mit V. Ja, und das war's.
Das war's. Ja, ciao mit V. President Clinton, thanks for talking to us.
Glad to do it.
First, some questions on the news of the day. The terrible, horrific attack In Kenya, on a mall, a group of terrorists scores a dead, over 100 wounded. What does this say about the threat of these groups that say they're inspired by Al-Qaeda?
Well, al-Shabaab's been doing a lot of damage in that part of the world for a long time, and they attempted to take over Somalia. And they were mad at the Kenyan government for sending soldiers across the border into Somalia to try to keep them from causing trouble in Kenya. So they clearly had been looking for an opportunity to exact retribution, and it's a terrible thing. And all those innocent people, as we were talking before the interview started, we lost one of our foundation's people there, one of our health access workers who was a wonderful Dutch nurse who was in Nairobi because she was about to have a baby, and she and the baby's father were just strolling through the mall. It's tragic.
Is this the kind of thing that we just have to expect is going to happen?
Well, yes and no. That is, I know that since President Obama's been there, when President Bush was there, when I was in office, we prevented a lot of these. But it's not like baseball. You don't get credit for saves. You got to try to keep it from ever happening. But these things happen. We had even more people killed, you remember, 15 years ago in the embassy bombings where the car bombs exploded outside the embassies in Kenya and in Tanzania. And we just have to keep working on it. But I've been very impressed with the Kenyan government, the way they handled this. I thought they handled it with firmness and dignity, and they've been pretty effective.
Syria. Another very troubled part of the world. Right now, there is this action initiative on the way to get the Syrians to give up control of their chemical weapons. What effect, if any, do you think this has had on the Iranian government, which now seems to be saying it's open to do something about nuclear stockpile?
Well, if it's true, it's good news. And I think the Syrian effort on chemical weapons has merit in and of itself, because we want to not have chemical warfare in the 21st century. But the larger hope is that once Syria and the Russians get into a transparent international arena, that they will help us to restore the peace process in Syria, to end the fighting, because you can kill a lot of people without chemical weapons. And that's what we're all worried about, all of us who have hated this, been sympathetic with the rebels, not just Americans, but people all over the world. But it looks to me like Russia may have recalibrated what its national interest is and thought about what chaos in Syria might mean to the region, and ultimately ricocheting across all the way back to its troubled areas on its southern border. So maybe this will be the beginning of a peace process, and maybe we will see an opportunity seized by this new president of Iran. We have to explore all those things and work for the best while we prepare for the worst. That's what you should always do in this circumstance.
Meanwhile, the Israelis are looking at this very skeptical. They're saying they think it could be a trap, and there's a lot of conversation, President Clinton, that the Israelis are prepared to strike Iran on their own. If they do that, what would the repercussions be?
Well, they could be quite significant, but I think they haven't done that, partly because they've tried to leave the door open to a settlement, but they want to take a hard line on it because they've heard all these protestations before. We have no intention of having nuclear weapons, and the program just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger to give them the capacity to build weapons. So I think it's a nice cautionary reminder for all of us that you go into these things with your eyes wide open, and if there are commitments made, they have to be kept and verified. But I think on balance, this is positive. This new president seems to want a rapprochement with the United States, and we just have to make sure that if we do this, it's real. And that's why I think the president and all of his advisors right now, they're trying to figure out now what's the best way to do this. Should we have lower level meetings first? Should I meet with the guy and talk about this and then see what happens? And meanwhile, they can't take their eye off the ball in Syria. One test of the good faith of Iran and Russia will be whether President Assad actually identifies all those chemical weapons and gives them up. So that could trigger a whole set of positive things. And we need it. The people there need it. So it may work, it may not, but at least we've got something to work on.
A lot of news here at home as well. The budget. We're looking at yet another shutdown in Congress over funding the government. Republicans saying they want to strip out the funding for healthcare reform, the former president's so-called Obamacare. Is there anything more the president, the Democrats, could have done to keep this country from heading into yet another of these impasses?
When the Republicans decided that not raising the debt ceiling was better than closing the government down, but it will amount to the same thing if we can't get any more money. So we now have members of Congress who voted to spend this money and now don't want to vote to pay for it. But I don't know what else he could do. I don't think he can be, you can't say a previous Congress passed this bill. You're implementing it. We don't like it. Therefore, we're going to shut the government down and destroy the full faith and credit of the United States if you don't get rid of it for us. The Republicans themselves are divided on that. I also hope he won't, if he can stop it, allow these big cuts in the nutrition programs. I saw where in the Wall Street Journal the other day they were saying, well, this is just consistent with what I did on welfare reform. That is not true. I vetoed 2 welfare reform bills because they cut food stamps and Medicaid and turned them into block grants. The only reason the food stamp program is as big as it is that the recovery has been anemic, the jobs that have been created have been low income, and most of the people that are running these numbers up are hardworking people with children who need that to feed their families properly. Now, when you put that to the side, it seems to me that given the fact that the president had already committed to cut $1 trillion over the next decade, they could put together a budget that would continue to bring the deficit down. That's all we need to do, and we can do that.
When it comes to healthcare reform, though, it's still very unpopular within the majority of Americans who say they don't understand it, they don't like it. Would it be a good idea to delay some of the major pieces of healthcare reform for another year?
No, it won't get any more popular because the Republicans don't want the government to be able to help make health care both available and more affordable. It violates their ideology. So nothing's going to happen in this next year on the issues still to be resolved in terms of implementation that would change that. The only thing that will change public opinion is when it works. And we do know from what we've seen so far that the cost of insurance for modest income people might be as little as $100 a month. We do know, based on what we've seen so far, that in the aggregate, the insurance premiums are coming in at 20% below their estimated cost, even by the Congressional Budget Office. We also know that for all of the attacks on health care, it is less unpopular than President Bush's Medicare drug program was when it started, and there were horrible problems with the implementation. The Democrats didn't try to repeal it, even though most of them voted against it. Instead, they tried to make it work. That's what you do with the law. We tried to help. So the members of Congress should be doing what the Democrats who voted against the drug program did. They should be telling their citizens how it worked and how to make the most of it. And that's what the administration should do, and that's what we're going to try to do. I mean, my library is going to help people enroll in Arkansas. That's what everybody should do. It's a law.
2 other quick things before we get to the Clinton Global Initiative. Number 1, guns. Another mass shooting, this time in Washington, D.C. This week, and yet the appetite for gun control doesn't seem to be there. The president said yesterday there just seems to be no will to do this. Is gun control effectively dead for the time being in this country?
Well, we have 2 options that would make sensible gun measures possible. One is we can put them on the ballot state by state. In Colorado, keep in mind, where you had Aurora and Columbine, in 2000, the voters of Colorado voted 70-30 to close the gun show loophole, something the Senate can't get done now. Why is that? That's the second issue. We can defend the people who vote with the majority if the voters who support this will vote for the candidates on the basis of it. This is a very simple political program. It's arithmetic. All these measures, limiting the size of the ammunition clips, not having assault weapons, anything, Americans will support reasonable things as long as they don't interfere with the ability to hunt, sports shoot, or defend your home. They will support other measures. But the people who are for these things won't vote against you if you're on the other side. The people who are against them will vote against you if you're on the other side. So that creates a political imbalance. I'll bet you anything, I haven't seen the surveys, that those two legislators who were recalled in Colorado, I'll bet you anything that in their districts there was majority support for the position they took. But a court ruled that in a recall election you couldn't vote by mail. 70% of Colorado voters typically vote by mail. So it became harder to vote. And those who were against felt more passionately than those who were for, and they lost. So I hope it's not over, but I think when Joe Manchin, a conservative Democrat from West Virginia, and Pat Toomey, a conservative Republican from Pennsylvania, got together and said we ought to have universal background checks, it doesn't make sense to say the Second Amendment allows you to have a background check at a gun store but not online or at gun shows. That's where the American people were. It didn't pass because of the filibuster rule in the Senate, but there are a lot of people who believe that they cannot be protected because all these people who say, go vote that way, go vote that way, go vote that way, when it comes right down to it, don't defend their representatives who do.
One question about your wife, Secretary Clinton. She confirmed for the first time this past week, that she is again wrestling with the idea of running for president in 2024. Why did she choose to say this right now, after months of avoiding the press on this subject, and how much does she talk to you? You two are so close. How much do you talk about it?
I don't know why. I didn't I must say, until I read the reports of her interview, it struck me that she was pretty much saying what she always did. But
well, she confirmed it.
For whatever it's worth, our conversation, my advice to her has always been, get healthy, write your book, do your charitable work. We don't need a 4-year presidential campaign. It's amazing how much longer they are now. You know, when I declared for president for the 1992 election, it was in October of 91. I had a 13-month campaign. And I was 5th when I started out in the primary. I think it's a good thing for her to be a person. She's having a good time. We're having a good time.
But she can wait that long?
No, she can't. Neither she nor anyone else can. But she doesn't have to declare now or in 3 months or 6 months. And so I think she should just enjoy her life and finish her book and do this work she wants to do with this Too Small to Fail initiative. I just want her to be happy, and I think she'll make a better decision about this political issue if everything's going well in her life. That's what I think. So we're not nearly as political as everybody thinks we are. We don't sit around all the time talking about this. We swim in the late afternoon every day. And if either one of us even mentions a political topic, we will stop the other one and just talk about the weather or whatever.
But it happens.
Yeah, but not often. I mean, we talk about political topics only in the sense that we obviously discussed this horrible shooting in Kenya and what happened at the Navy Yard and the Syrian difficulties and all of that. But we don't talk about politics as much as people think.
So, the Clinton Global Initiative. This is your 17th year. The theme this year is mobilizing for impact. What does that mean, and how is it different from what you've done before?
It means, first of all, it's not different than what we actually called this thing in the beginning. We started it to mobilize people to make commitments. And we learned a lot over the last 9 years about, we learned we had to help people make the commitments. We learned we had to help people keep the commitments. We learned that keeping a commitment and keeping it well are two different things. We learned that the commitments that had the largest number of partners, if they worked together, had the highest probability of success and the highest probability of impacting a very large number of people. So what we're doing this year is trying to teach people through the commitments that are made and the progress reports that are made and all the sessions we're having, how you can mobilize beyond your own sphere of activity. How, if you're a non-governmental organization, you get business and political people to help you and philanthropists and others. And because we realize these networks of cooperation, that's what the whole global initiative is, but being able to put together a network of cooperation dramatically increases the impact of whatever good purpose you have.
Most people, I think, in this country look at the incredible poverty that exists around the world, developing countries. They look at the lack of educational opportunities, the lack of healthcare opportunities, economic, just again, a lack of window of opportunity, and especially when it comes to women and girls. And they ask, how do you know when you're making a difference? How do you see... How do you measure the progress has been made?
I'll give you an example. That's the best way to answer it. From our own foundation, but this will show how. One of the biggest debates in the world today is whether the largest amount of arable land, that is farmable land on earth, not presently in production, which is in Africa, should be turned over to big mechanized farms, paid for by countries that have lots of money and can't feed themselves, including throwing hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of small farmers off the land. A lot of them women. I think that would be a terrible thing, but we do have to feed the world. So in order to do that, I've been working for years to prove it doesn't have to be done. That is, you could have highly productive, very small farms. So in Malawi, we've got this anchor farm, about 400 acres. We teach people the best farming techniques. We buy for the farmers cheaper seed, cheaper fertilizer, cheaper insecticide. We take their crops to market for free. We store them properly so they can wait till they get a high price. And we're talking about women on an acre of land, farming with a hoe. I was down there planting with this woman, farming with a hoe on an acre.
A hoe?
21,000 of them. First year, average increase in income, 567%. Average increase in outcome, they're producing 2.5 times as much food on the same piece of land. So we lowered the cost of their inputs, we increased the productivity, we cut the cost of getting the food to market and got them a better price, and they're making 5 times as much as they were. That's how you know. If you can do something like that, you know. Then you have to take it and get lots of people to do it. We're about to do 5 of these. So in Malawi alone, we'll have over 100,000 farmers telling that story. We just started one in Tanzania. That's the way you know.
And finally, to those Americans who are listening to you right now, President Clinton, and they're saying, this is all well and good, but we have got a lot of problems in this country. This is a question you get all the time. What do you say to Americans who say, why don't you focus more energy on what's going on right here?
That's why I have a meeting of this global initiative just for the American economy every year. And we're going to go to Denver this year. And I try to identify specific things that we can do to try to grow the economy and that companies can do. Because we're a big, complicated country, a lot of it would be more effective if we had supportive government action, but it's difficult to do in the standoff that exists in Washington today. But there are some things we can do. Let me just give you one simple example. We know that we need 120,000 computer science graduates a year. They could all get jobs. We know right now we only graduate 40,000 people with those degrees. We know part of the problem is kids coming out of high school don't feel comfortable taking those courses and don't feel able. So the president asked years ago, like 3 years ago, 4 years ago, for 100,000 more science, engineering, and math teachers. And what we're doing is to put together partners. We now have 24 partners who have raised the money and made the arrangements for the schools to train and place 30,000 of that 100,000. And, you know, I'm upset we hadn't done 100,000. I thought this is one thing, we ought to take this off the government's back. Let's put those teachers out there for people and get them going. Then there are things that relate more immediately to jobs. I get people to think about how they could go to the middle of the country instead of overseas to put up a lot of these information technology jobs. Google's spending $1 billion in Kansas City to give them high-speed broadband. The healthcare people locally in Knoxville, Tennessee are doing the same thing. I try to find things that are working and then spread it in other parts of the country. That could be done now and quickly.
So your focus is everywhere?
Yeah, but I really do care about the American economy. It's just that I have to be very disciplined in what is likely to have a positive impact. You know, we can talk till the cows come home. I'm interested in doing something.
President Clinton, thank you for talking to us on the Horst Bauernhof podcast. Thanks very much.
Thank you.